The radar screen flashed, then went blood red. A piercing screech of torn metal rang out. In the middle of the ocean, at Second Thomas Shoal, the ship BRP Sierra Madre, a rusty yet steadfast fortress of the Philippines, was awaiting a fateful resupply run. But this time, the blocker wasn't a Chinese Coast Guard ship. This time it wasn't water cannons or blinding lasers. In your eyes, a hulking black silhouette emerged from sea mist. A Type 052D destroyer, a true war monster of the People's Liberation Army Navy of China, was charging at full speed. This was not a gray zone collision. This was a deliberate military act. The armored warship hull, thousands of tons, rammed straight into the flank of the small Philippine Coast Guard ship. Its hull shattered like paper. The supply ship sank within minutes, taking with it the crew's last hopes. An eerie silence blanketed the sea. The Chinese destroyer didn't stop to rescue. Instead, its fire control radar lit up, locking on targets. Its 130mm gun turret slowly swung toward Berlinia, Sierra Madre, a threat that couldn't be clearer. Immediately, a hotline was activated. Manila had no other option. The Mutual Defense Treaty with Washington, a document viewed as symbolic for decades, was formally invoked. At the Pentagon, alarm bells rang out. A treaty ally had been attacked. The South China Sea chessboard flipped. The question was no longer whether the U.S. would act, but when and how. The whole world held its breath. This wasn't a spontaneous act. It was the result of a cold calculation, hatched long ago, inside the Southern Theater Fleet's command centers. Gray zone tactics, the cabbage strategy using militia boats, Coast Guard ships, water cannons, and lasers, had reached their limit. Despite pressure, the Philippines kept holding on. The presence of the BRP Sierra Madre, though rusty, had become a symbol, a challenge Beijing could not abide. They decided it was time to change the rules of the game. They needed a stronger message, a message of steel. Beijing's assumption rested on a core belief that America would never spill American blood. For a shoal, unknown in the South China Sea, they believed Washington, weary from Middle East wars, bogged down by the Ukraine crisis, and deeply divided at home, would respond only with tired diplomatic phrases. Deep concern, strong condemnation, urge restraint. To Chinese strategists, these phrases were synonymous with weakness, so the order was given. Don't use the Coast Guard, use the Navy. The Type 052D destroyer, the fleet's pride, was chosen as the tool. It's one of Asia's most modern warships, equipped with AESA radar, long-range SAMs, and cruise missiles. Using it to ram a Coast Guard ship was killing a chicken with a butcher's knife, a deliberate humiliation, a declaration of absolute power. On the board, by now, the forces were clear on China's side. The Southern Fleet was at the highest combat readiness. The provocative Type 052D was only the spear point. Behind it lurked dozens of other warships and submarines silently on patrol. More importantly, the illegally militarized bases on Vietnam's Spratly Islands, especially Mischief Reef, Quarterin Reef, and Subi Reef, had been turned into unsinkable fortresses, runways long enough for bombers, hangars for J-11 fighters, J-20s, and HQ-9 missile launchers were all coming online. They had created an anti-access bubble, area denial, aka A2/AD, that they believe no U.S. fleet would dare challenge. On the Philippines side, they have almost nothing. Their navy is small, their air force is fragile. The Marines aboard BRP Sierra Madre are now completely isolated, becoming unwilling hostages. They have only courage and a treaty. As for the U.S., some 700 nautical miles away in the Philippine Sea, the carrier strike group, USS Ronald Reagan, was on a routine patrol, but nothing on this ship is ever routine. USS Ronald Reagan is not just an aircraft carrier, it's a floating city, a symbol of American power, and a war machine worth tens of billions of dollars. Around it is a steel ring, Ticonderoga-class cruisers, carrying hundreds of Tomahawk and Standard missiles, Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, the Guardians equipped with the most sophisticated Aegis systems, and on the flight deck is its soul, over 70 aircraft, F/A, 18 Super Hornets, the reliable workhorses, EA-18G Growlers, the phantoms of electronic warfare, and most importantly, F-35C Lightning II jets, stealth knights, a weapon China has never faced in real combat. As soon as news of the attack was confirmed, The atmosphere in the White House Situation Room turned dense. This was the 3 a.m. call every U.S. president dreads. Pentagon generals, intelligence chiefs, and national security advisors were all present, faces steeled. A map of the South China Sea was projected on the main screen, with a blinking red dot at Second Thomas Shoal. "Mr. President," the chairman of the Joint Chiefs began, his voice tinged with emotion. At 2:41 Zulu, a destroyer, Type 052D of the Chinese Navy, deliberately rammed and sank the BRP Malapascua of the Philippine Coast Guard. The Philippines has formally requested activation of Article 5 of the Mutual Defense Treaty. We are, in theory, in a state of war. 3 options were placed on the table. Option A, diplomatic condemnation. This is the safest option. We are to summon the Chinese ambassador, issue a joint statement at the United Nations, impose a few symbolic sanctions. But everyone in the room understood. This choice would amount to killing the MDT. It would send a message to every U.S. ally around the world, from Tokyo to Seoul, from Berlin to Warsaw, that Washington's promises are just scrap paper. China would win, without firing another shot. Option B, confrontational intervention. Send a group of destroyers, Arleigh Burke straight to Second Thomas Shoal, to face the Chinese ship directly. This is a dangerous game of nerves. What if China doesn't back down? What if a young captain, under strain, makes a mistake? Another collision, a gunnery duel. This is exactly the escalation scenario of uncontrolled crisis that China wants. They have home field advantage and numbers on the spot. The U.S. would be bogged down in a prolonged standoff. Then option C was presented, a bold plan, high risk but potentially game-changing. We carry out a punitive strike. The order came from Indo-Pacific Command, proposed over a secure video link. Secure, a surgical strike, controlled, limited, and lightning fast. The target is not mainland China, nor the artificial islands. The main target is the offending vessel, only that ship. The room fell silent. You're talking about sinking a Chinese warship? The National Security Advisor asked, skeptical. Emplace anti-tank guns and shoulder-fired air defense missiles. They completely control the vital arteries, blocking Thai reinforcement forces and creating a fait accompli, irreversible on the ground. On Thailand's side, chaos engulfs the border units, long used only to sporadic skirmishes, now completely overwhelmed. Survivors try to retreat in panic. Communications are cut. Command has no grasp of the situation, disoriented. At Thailand's strategic air bases, sirens howl deafeningly. The best pilots of the F-16 and Gripen are ordered to scramble. The Hawks and Raptors streak into the night sky, bearing the hope of reversing the tide. But they face a thorny problem. Fighting in the dark, when friend and foe have completely blended together. The Cambodian Special Operations Troops, after seizing the high ground, quickly disperse and conceal themselves, and use Thailand's rugged terrain itself as a shield. The Thai Air Force cannot bomb at will, cannot simply drop fire on its own territory, without clearly identified targets, and with almost no. The chaos of the fog of war, fuck off war, completely cripples Bangkok's initial air counterstrike. Deeper analysis reveals Phnom Penh's strategic intent. First, to create a fait accompli, face complete. By seizing a slice of Thai territory, no matter how small, they gain an absolute advantage at the table, forcing Bangkok, from a superior posture, to sit down and talk from weakness. Second, and most important, this is a test, a trial by fire. Phnom Penh is testing America's commitment to Thailand, whether the Manila Treaty and the Thanet-Rusk Statement, the foundational documents of the U.S.Thai alliance, spanning decades, still have practical value, or are merely papers, gathering dust with time. How will Washington respond? Quickly or slowly, forcefully or weakly, when a longtime ally is attacked, and we cannot ignore. The gigantic shadow backstage, Beijing, need not show its face. It only has to watch in silence. It supplies weapons and intelligence, and, most crucially, gives the political green light. This scenario is, for them, a perfect test. If Cambodia succeeds, China benefits. America's influence in Southeast Asia is pushed back significantly. If Cambodia fails, China loses nothing but a pawn on the board. In return, they harvest priceless data on reaction time. Will to intervene. and U.S. methods of warfare. In a modern proxy conflict, a move couldn't be more devious. The whole region holds its breath. The initial shock in Bangkok quickly turns to fury, stabbed in the back by a neighbor. They never considered a present military threat. This is an insult that cannot be accepted. Thailand's command system, though paralyzed in the first hour, does not collapse. They are a professional army, well trained. As dawn breaks, counterattack orders are issued. Armored Brigade No. 2, with steel fists T-84 oplots and even VT-4s from China itself, is immediately dispatched to the Sikio front. Following them are famed Caesar 155mm self-propelled howitzer batteries, quickly setting up positions, ready to unleash storms of fire. But the counterattack is anything but easy. The Cambodian Special Operations troops have seized the heights. They've had nearly 12 hours to dig trenches, Siamen, and in place anti-tank teams, and shoulder-fired air defense, missiles, manpads, are now nothing more than useless hunks of metal. The ship has been completely cut off from the outside world. The door is open. The lead Growler pilot reports tersely. That's the signal from the dark. The first two F-35C close in. They don't need to fly fast. They fly methodically. They are phantoms. The LTS sensor system, under the nose, locks onto the destroyer's massive heat signature of the Type 052D. The ship, in desperation, tries to figure out what is happening. They close to an ideal launch position, beyond the reach of any air defense weapon the ship might possess. Even if it weren't blind, target locked, ready to fire. The F-35 pilot's calm voice comes over. Two F-35C simultaneously open their internal weapon base, a critical action to maintain stealth. 4 long-range stealth anti-ship missiles, LRASM, are released. These missiles don't rush straight to the target. They are smart weapons. They weave along preset waypoints, skimming extremely low over the waves, to avoid any remaining auxiliary radar that might detect them. With onboard artificial intelligence, they automatically analyze and pick the weakest point to strike. Aboard the 052D, panic sets in. Its radar briefly reactivates for a few seconds after the Growlers temporarily shift jamming toward shore targets. But in those precious seconds, what the radar sees is an aircraft. It sees for objects coming in at subsonic speed. Only a few dozen kilometers out, missiles inbound, bearing 270. Klaxons rip through the ship, close in Air Defense HQ 9 and Type 1. Phalanx-like systems spew fire frantically. Thousands of 30mm rounds stream skyward, forming a wall of fire. A few HQ-9s leap up in desperation. But it's too late. The LRASM are in their terminal phase. They pop up, then dive, aiming at 2 points: the engine room and the CIC, right beneath the radar mast. The first warhead slams into the hull below the waterline. The 450 kilograms blast tears the steel skin open. Seawater floods in. The second rams straight into the VLS. At the bow, a monstrous secondary explosion erupts as the ship's own missiles detonate. A pillar of fire shoots sky high, lighting up the heavens. The third and fourth strike the superstructure nearly together. The command center vanishes in a fireball. The AESA radar, the ship's pride, is blown off its mount. The Type 052D destroyer, one of China's most modern warships, snaps in two. It sinks in under 3 minutes, faster than the Philippine Coast Guard ship it rammed and sank hours earlier. A punishment precise, cold, and utterly ruthless. At South Sea Fleet HQ in Zhangjiang, officers are stunned. On the overview display, the red dot for their destroyer has just vanished. No warning, no distress call, only the sudden silence of a ship worth nearly $1 billion and hundreds of sailors. The A2/AD bubble they painstakingly built, their faith in the inviolability of the artificial islands, has just been pierced with a mortal hole. Other Chinese warships besieging Second Thomas Shoal receive a terse, panicked order: withdraw immediately. Fall back to Mischief Reef. Maximum alert status. Fall back to Mischief Reef. Go to maximum alert. They retreated in fear, terrified they would be the next target. The news spread swiftly through the corridors of power. In Moscow, the Kremlin issued a feeble statement, calling on all parties to exercise restraint and resolve differences through dialogue, but they took no real action. They lacked both the ability and the will to intervene in America's backyard while still entangled in Ukraine. Russia's silence was a silent consent. Washington's message had been delivered, and it wasn't spoken in words. It was delivered with missiles. The U.S. didn't strike China's mainland, nor bomb its artificial islands, though it easily could. Instead, it executed a precise, surgical strike, targeting only the weapon used to attack its ally. It was a surgical act of punishment, a firm declaration that the Mutual Defense Treaty is not just a piece of paper to be displayed in a museum. It is a pledge written in blood and steel. The F-35C, LRASM, and EA-18G, this trio proved themselves to be true game changers. In modern naval warfare, the battle may have ended, but the real chess game had only just begun. The Lightning Sea battle was over, but the punishment wasn't. Aboard the USS Ronald Reagan, the F-35CS and EA-18GS touched down, their fuselages still reeking of victory and fuel. Their mission had been flawlessly executed, but the Pentagon understood. Sinking a ship wasn't enough. That was only material punishment. Now came the decisive psychological strike, a blow that would change the game. To ensure, the message was burned deep into the enemy's mind. As dawn broke over the South China Sea, another scene unfolded at Andersen Air Force Base in Guam. The doors of a special hangar opened, revealing a strange silhouette in the shadows. A massive jet-black flying wing, slowly being towed to the runway. It was the B-2 Spirit, a $2 billion stealth war machine, a symbol of America's global might. 2 Spirits, codenamed Red Fury and Spectre, took off into the sky. They needed no escort, no electronic warfare support. They were phantoms themselves. They didn't fly at F-35 speed. They advanced with the calm certainty of executioners. They flew straight toward the South China Sea, refueling quietly along the way. This was the message. The sinking of the Type 052D could be dismissed, perhaps, as a lucky ambush by F-35s, but the B-2 was different. Its appearance in broad daylight, over what China claimed as untouchable airspace, was a direct slap at its entire A2/AD doctrine. When the two B-2s entered the South China Sea, they didn't switch on radar. They did nothing, just flew. They circled once, right above the coordinates where the Type 052D had sunk, where the sea still glistened with oil and wreckage. Then they flew further, over Mischief Reef and near Fiery Cross Reef. China's HQ, 9 radar systems on those islands, blinded from the night before, now spun helplessly in vain. Chinese control stations might have caught faint interference, a blurry shadow they couldn't explain on their screens, before it vanished. That was true terror. The enemy was right above them. They could carry bombs. They could carry missiles. They could erase those islands in minutes. But they didn't. They simply flew past, to prove they could. This was the decisive psychological strike. It told Beijing, "We sank your destroyer with F-35s, and you never saw them. And now, you see us, and still, there's nothing you can do. We are flying strategic bombers, right above your heads, and there's nothing you can do. Your air defense network, your so-called A2/AD bubble, is just an illusion." China's losses that night were beyond measure. In material terms, they lost a key destroyer, Type 052D, one of their most advanced and sophisticated warships. They lost hundreds of sailors, men highly trained and disciplined, but that was only the tip of the iceberg. The greatest loss was confidence. Confidence in the strength of the South Sea Fleet. Confidence in their artificial islands, once touted as unsinkable aircraft carriers, now exposed as dangerously vulnerable. Their radars went blind. Their missiles never had the chance to launch. The second loss was face. China had acted like a bully, ramming a warship into a Coast Guard vessel, and was punished for it, not through diplomacy, but through force. They were struck down immediately, right before the eyes of their neighbors. The Philippines, the weakest nation, was suddenly protected by the image of the paper tiger that China once mocked the U.S. with. now seemed to haunt Beijing itself. Arrogance had its price. They had miscalculated, gravely misjudged America's resolve. They believed the MDT was just a relic of the past. They were wrong, dead wrong. For the United States, however, this was a total victory. Weapons programs costing trillions of dollars had just proven their worth. In a terrifyingly real scenario, the F-35C wasn't just a dogfighter. It was a stealth assassin, a flying command center, capable of infiltration and destruction. The LRASM missiles proved to be the anti-ship weapon of the 21st century. Stealthy, intelligent, and lethal. And the EA-18G Growler, the silent hero, proved that in modern warfare, whoever controls the electromagnetic spectrum wins. The balance of power had shifted. A chilling silence fell over Beijing. Zhongnanhai was in crisis. They couldn't escalate. To escalate meant facing the U.S. 7th Fleet head-on, and now they knew they weren't ready. They could lose far more than a destroyer. Nor could they admit the truth. They couldn't tell 1.4 billion citizens that their navy had just been humiliated, that a main warship was sunk. Without firing a shot, that would shatter the image of the China dream, the vision of a great national rise. So they chose the only option left. China's state media, like Xinhua and Global Times, began condemning the U.S., accusing Washington of violating sovereignty by flying B-2s provocatively over the South China Sea. They spoke of hegemony and Cold War mentality, but never, absolutely never, mentioned the Type 052D. They never mentioned the attack. To the media, that silence itself was a confession of defeat. On the ground, the change was even clearer. The entire fleet, China's Coast Guard and maritime militia, which had been blockading Second Thomas Shoal, received an order: switch off radar, turn around, and retreat to the artificial islands at full speed. They no longer kept a safe distance. They were fleeing. The crisis was temporarily over, but it ended with a punch. The price of arrogance had been an expensive lesson. In a single night, the South China Sea was reset. A new order written in missiles, backed by stealth technology, and decided by the will of those who dared strike. A heavy, suffocating silence fell once again, blanketed the South China Sea. The crisis paused, not by a ceasefire agreement, but by a knockout punch. Technical, China was forced to withdraw. They returned to the negotiating table with the Philippines, but not as the superior party, doling out favors. They sat down with the posture of one who had just realized a miscalculation. Their position had visibly weakened. By contrast, the United States wasted no time. Carrier strike groups, Aegis destroyers, stepped up freedom of navigation patrols, or FONUPs, at unprecedented intensity. They were no longer merely challenging unlawful claims. They were parading through them as an assertion of the new order, just established. This brutal hypothetical scenario, though only in analysis, has left hard-learned lessons. The first lesson, red line. Between gray zone tactics and an act of war lies an extremely thin boundary. China deliberately stepped over it and paid the price immediately. The second lesson, the power of deterrence. Deterrence does not lie in grand declarations or dust-covered treaties. It works only when the adversary absolutely believes you have the capability and the will to use force. That night, the United States proved both. The punch with F-35s SM was the affirmation that the Mutual Defense Treaty is not empty words. The third lesson, and perhaps the most important, technology decides the modern battlefield. This confrontation was not decided by numbers of ships or missiles, but by the ability to see without being seen and to strike without being detected. Stealth factors, including F-35, B-2, and LRASM missiles, combined with the overwhelming power of electronic warfare from the EA-18G, prove they can paralyze and pierce any defense system, including A2/AD networks funded by hundreds of billions of dollars. For Vietnam, this scenario underscores an indisputable truth: peace and stability never come naturally. To preserve peace, one must rely on intrinsic strength, modernize the Navy and Air Force, possess weapons with real deterrent power, able to ensure that any adventurism by an adversary must pay an extremely heavy price. But more important than military strength is diplomatic finesse. Maintain balance. Avoid being dragged into the great powers game. Never let one's territory become a battlefield. In the end, Peace is always fragile, and it is safeguarded only by cool heads and ever-sharp swords.